Hello and welcome to coverage of Grand Prix Helsinki. I'm Caillou, and today we're going to be watching the round 3 match between HonchkrowDavid, who's playing Mardu ArisTomeCrats, and CyberChronometer, who is playing Dreamsight Control. So HonchkrowDavid's deck is essentially an Aristocrats deck, which uses the titular card Tome of Loss to recur a bunch of creatures out of the grave for essentially a combo kill. Um, Meanwhile, Cyber's deck is a 140 card control deck, which gets by using a bunch of redundancy, tutors, and the titular card Dreamsight well, which draws you 5 cards if you have more than 100 cards in library. So far, David has curved a turn 1 Brotherhood Conspirant into a Goblin Twin Blades turn 2. Brotherhood Conspirant is really good in that it allows you to it's a sack outlet that puts cards into your graveyard for Tome of Loss. And Goblin Twin Blades is the best dragon fodder for this type of deck because it's recurable with Tome of Loss. But yeah, Cyber has not done much yet. And turn 3 with David on the play is going to run out a Twilight Blade. So now has a sack outlet and a Blood Artist effect. And is also getting to swing in with these goblins. So Cyber basically needs to hit a violent collapse now. Otherwise, this board state could get out of hand to the point where Cyber wiping wouldn't even help because of the Blood Artist. It looks like Cyber doesn't have the Violent Collapse yet. Is actually just playing more tap lands and passing. On end of turn, David is going to sack the token to Brotherhood Conspirant, which is kind of surprising to me, unless David already has a Tome of Loss in hand, in which case I could definitely see this being reasonable. But no, it doesn't. Okay, gonna run out another sack outlet, Autumnal Watch. This one is more generically good than Brotherhood Conspirant because of its Impulse Draw ability, which essentially gets you card advantage off of your sacrifices, and also having power and toughness so it can actually swing. Speaking of swinging, David's gonna swing in for 3 with the Twilight Blade plus the Goblin Twin Blades. Looks like maybe David is needing a 4th land to immediately play a tome and then bring back creatures. But wow, okay, he's going to sack a Brotherhood Conspirant to Autumnal Watch, revealing a Sunlit Highland. So he's just going to play that, I suppose. And then, I guess, has a second Brotherhood Conspirant in hand, so he's just going to run that out. Oh, but there's a titular card from Cyber. Gonna run out the Dreamsight well and draw a whopping 5 cards. We'll have to discard 3 to go down to hand size at end of turn, but still, draw 5, discard 3 is still entirely respectable, especially when Cyber has lots of cards which function with Grave Synergy. So Cyber's gonna discard an Exent, Recall Forgotten Aeons, and a Once Abandoned. Recall Forgotten Aeons is notable because as a revelation, it is castable from grave once Cyber has 7 lands. For now, though, it seems like Cyber didn't have the wipe that they needed, and as such is just going to eat 4 more damage at minimum this turn. Oh no. And David with the Sadistic Indulgence. Whew, fortunately Cyber has a negate for that. Otherwise that coming down would have been an extra 3 damage with the Twilight Blade. And honestly, if David had sacked him to Autumnal Watch, could have hit another Blood Artist effect in the middle, and maybe even killed Cyber this turn. Okay, so David's going to sack the Brotherhood Conspirant to Autumnal Watch, hitting his Zadina Envoys. So then, yeah, just going to play the Zadina Envoys and has a 3rd Brotherhood Conspirant. God damn. So he's going to swing in for 3. I'm surprised that David didn't swing in with the Autumnal Watch. Not sure what that's about. Maybe just forgot that Autumnal Watch isn't just an enchantment that says, me good sack outlet. So Cyber's just going to play a Seek Prophecy, revealing a Violent Collapse, Grave Tutor, and Arcane Genesis. I think you just snap take the Violent Collapse and then wipe the board, right? Yup. Plays the Violent Collapse. Takes 5 damage from the Twilight Blade. And then the Zadina Envoys creates 2 tokens. So, oh wow, is sacking the Envoys, actually. Because I was thinking that Envoys could just die and then provide David with a board to attack. but I guess might just have Tome of Loss in hand, and so is just going to do a Hyper Mill right now, and then next turn drop Tome of Loss and just kill Cyber outright. All of this drains Cyber to 1 life anyways, so I don't know that it matters. Really, maybe David doesn't have Tome already, and the plan is just Brotherhood Conspirant to dig 7 cards deep in order to try and hit a Tome. So I feel like David just... Oh. And so David hit a Twilight Blade. Already had a Brotherhood Conspirant in hand. So just sacks the Twilight Blade to the Brotherhood Conspirant. And that's game 2. And I think, yeah, this just shows the power of David's deck and the problems with Dreamsight. Like, Dreamsight sometimes is just off by 1 turn too much in finding its answers, and that can be painful. It has trouble setting up its mana base against aggressive decks because of how slow it is. So both of those came back to bite Dreamsight here. Meanwhile, ArisTomeCrats just are kind of good, man. And Autumnal Watch particularly is really strong at being able to just get you that card advantage. The Brotherhood Watch as the Pseudo-Scry or Pseudo-Surveil is super strong. And ultimately, like, you don't need to put on a crazy amount of aggression for the little pings to add up, and that's what makes it so hard for control and stuff to deal with, because they're, even though you have like Sack Owls and Blood Artists, which are like high priority targets, it is really hard to just deal with it with a single wipe like you could with normal aggro. But yeah, let's look at sideboarding for both of these decks. So I could see one more Tome of Loss coming in maybe, just because Cyber has both counter magic and wipes galore, so it could just be like, your board is probably going to get wiped for sure, and then Tome of Loss just brings it back. And even if you have a 2 Tome of Loss main, Cyber could just counter one of them, so you want to bring in more so that you have a higher density. Unbound Dremora is relatively good against control decks because of the discard. And then Seal the Tomb is great versus Revelations. So I could Conspiracy of Ravens maybe, but I don't know that the hand attack is worth it. It might be. So the cards that could come in are Tome of Loss, Unbound Dremora, Seal the Tomb, and Conspiracy of Ravens in some order. But I think David's main is already relatively well teched out, so I have trouble thinking about what would come out. Meanwhile, for Cyber, sideboarding is kind of difficult because you're playing a 140 card deck. However, I think Singularity's Grasp is an easy include because it punishes them playing Tome early. And then if they play Tome late, you can like wipe and then have counter magic. Farmer's Repose for Tome is another thing that would come in. And then I think Banish as exile removal probably. Arena's Defiance is also good because of if a creature would leave the battlefield this turn, exile it instead mode. So I think Banish, Arena's Defiance, Farmer's Repose, and Singularity's Grasp are probably coming in. So unlike last game, Cyber's going to come out the cage swinging, turn 1 Wheat from Chaff. And Cyber discards 2 lands, which is actually interesting because I feel like in most decks you're like, oh yeah, okay, they're just going to discard lands because they already have more than enough lands in hand and they want to keep action. But Dreamsight is very greedy in terms of mana and has cards that function from the graveyard. So I think it's interesting that Cyber decided to discard lands there because it kind of is revealing about what Cyber has in hand and what Cyber drew. Meanwhile, speaking of coming out the gate swinging, God, that's exactly what David's doing. Turn 1 Shadowban Consul. And this is the aggressive curve out that David's deck is scary for. Cyber just going to play Shifting Grove and pass. Could have a Cursory Glance open or might just be waiting to crack Clue on David's end. And continuing the aggressive curve, Zadina Envoys turn 2 and swings for 2 with the Shadowban Consul. And this is just every creature in David's deck is just resilient to wipes in some way. Oh, you're gonna wipe my Shadowband console? Cool, it'll just come back next turn. Oh, you want to kill my Zadina Envoys? Well, actually now there's 2 of them. What do you mean Zadina Envoys isn't an ooze? But yeah, on end, Cyber's just gonna crack the clue, draw a card. Cyber's just gonna play an Altmer Emissary, and then pass. Altmer Emissary is pretty strong if it is allowed to get its engine going, but I feel like in this case, David is just going to run Cyber over before Altmer Emissary can do anything. Swings in with Shadowband Console plus the Zadina Envoys, and Cyber's just going to take 4. Right now, this Brotherhood Consprint is pretty much, I don't think this is what David wants in terms of an aggressive curve out. I think a nice Twilight Blade is probably more suited. Or, Zadina Envoys number 2. And Cyber doesn't have the counter magic for this. If David continues this curve out, could be dead in 2 turns. So on end, Cyber's gonna use Altmer Emissary's ability to mill 2 cards. Hits an Ancestral Council and a Dreamsight well. Yeah, that does not bode well for Cyber. Cyber just drawing and passing. And the Altmer Emissary does give Cyber flexibility in that if there's nothing Cyber needs to use interaction on, or nothing that Cyber can use interaction on, can just use Altmer Emissary's ability on end and then draw a card. So David's going to swing for 6. In response, Cyber's just going to use Altmer Emissary's second ability, making it a 2/4, and is probably going to block one of the creatures right here, because it becomes a 2/4. So yeah, he's going to block the Zadina Envoys, so Cyber just takes 4, but the Zadina Envoys becomes 2 scouts. And he's going to sack it to Consprint in order to surveil. And oh god, Young Necromancer and a Goblin Twin Blades. Once again, the board is wide and resistant to wipes. Oh, so Cyber is just going to tap out for a Conjure Realities. One of the really strong tutor spells in this format, because it doesn't face tempo loss. And so is going to find and cast a stand, or is not going to cast the stand unassailable? Okay, so it's going to find the stand unassailable, and then abound the Violent Collapse from Cyber's hand. In response, David's going to sack the tokens to the Brotherhood Consprint. Not going to sack the non-tokens, because when the non-tokens die, they're going to create skeleton tokens off of the Young Necro. So wants to still retain a board. So gets 4 skeletons, plus 2 scouts off Zadina Envoys. And can also recur Shadowband Console next turn. So, not a bad deal. Not a bad deal at all. And while the Altmer Emissary can block one of these, this is enough for David to kill Cyber in 2 turns. Okay, so David's just going to play another Brotherhood Consprint and then swing out for a whopping 7. Cyber's going to eat one of the scout tokens, but I think David's going to sack it to the Consprint in response. Yup, sacks a token to the Brotherhood Consprint in response to blocks. And yeah, unless Cyber has a second wipe or second Conjure Realities, Cyber just loses next turn. And hell, even if Cyber has a wipe next turn, there's entirely the possibility that David has a Tome of Loss, especially since David, if Cyber has a wipe, can just sack all of the tokens to Brotherhood Consprint until he hits a Tome of Loss, and then recur everything with Tome of Loss. And oh my god, has a second Conjure Realities. Violent Collapse number 2 coming up. In response, David's just going to sack everything to the Brotherhood Consprint and then try to hit a Tome of Loss off top, I suppose. Okay, on end of turn, going to recur the Shadowband Console. Brotherhood Aspirant number 2. And has another Shadowband Console. But it looks like, did David really not hit a Tome of Loss right there? Or didn't dig deep enough for a Tome of Loss? That surprised me. That definitely surprises me. I guess the plan here is just swing with Shadowband Consoles and recur it each time when Cyber blocks with the Altmer. But yeah, Cyber's going to play a stand unassailable, gain up 7 life, say stabilizes at 10. So David's out really is Tome of Loss at this point. So David's going to swing in with both Shadowband Consoles. Cyber takes 2, goes to 8. and sacks the other the other Shadowban console to Brotherhood Conspirant, um, and then just is going to surveil once more, and is going to play Turned Watcher from hand, 3/2 flying lifelink, not bad. An important feature is that the lifelink actually is important here because it makes the cost of recurring Shadowban console negligible. Oh no, but Cyber has the Memento Mori! Just gonna exile David's graveyard. So, Tome of Loss is no longer a viable option for closing out this game. David's gonna have to do it the hard way. And the problem is, now Cyber can just start recurring wipes with Altmer Emissary's last ability, um, and then just lock David out of ever being able to play the game. Because David's only recurring card is Shadowban Console, which can be infinity blocked by Altmer Emissary. Oh my god, and Cyber with the stand unassailable too. And then gonna Ancestral Council. Can find a stand unassailable 3 or a Dreamsight well. And god, this game is feeling very, very over. Especially given that starting next turn, if Cyber has another land, Cyber can just use Altmer Emissary to recur stand unassailables every turn. And then just lock David out of the game. So he's going to find a Strike from the Shadows. Okay. I'm actually kind of surprised by that choice. I'm not sure why the targeted removal was super needed. I feel like a Dreamsight well or another stand unassailable could have been better, but I'm sure Cyber had their reasons. So David's going to play a top-decked Young Necro and then going to swing in with a Turned Watcher. So he's going to sack Shadowban Console to Turned Watcher, swings for 4, and gets to draw a card. And the third wipe of the game, Singularity's Grasp, is going to sack the Brotherhood Conspirant to itself in response. Everything else dies though, and David is left with 2 skeletons, neither of which can attack over the Altmer Emissary. Oh, and the Wheat from Chaff from Cyber for good measure. Okay, and once again on end, David's going to recur the Shadowban Console. So David is once again going to swing in with Shadowban Console plus the skeletons. So once again, the familiar cycle, Altmer Emissary blocks, sack to Conspirant. Oh wow, and he's going to main phase 2, recur the Shadowban Console and sacrifice it to the Brotherhood Conspirant. Now has enough black mana to do that, I guess. And I'm surprised actually that Cyber isn't tapping out for recurring a stand unassailable. Just gonna pass. David is once more gonna swing in with the skeletons plus Shadowban Console. You know, the same old thing, sacks it to the Brotherhood Conspirant. Like really, I think if Cyber started just recurring the stand unassailables, the game is just over. Like, gaining 7 each turn, like David's deck cannot come back from that. So I feel like Cyber's playing it a little bit fast and loose, and I think that I feel like Cyber just like doing that once is enough to just wrap this game up. Just because I think David at that point will realize that he can't come back from that. So on end recurs the Dreamsight well. Is going to play the Dreamsight well again. Again, I don't know that this the card that Cyber should be recurring, but hey, I guess every control player's dream is just infinite card advantage. Oh, and David has a Twilight Blade. Does Cyber have the interaction? Looks like. Is going to Arcane Genesis the Twilight Blade. Unfortunately, Arcane Genesis has the added upside of being Counterspell plus it exiles. Okay, so David is going to swing in with the Shadowban Console and Skeletons again. Blocks with Altmer again. Sacks it to Console again. And David's just going to concede at this point, but yeah. I think David could have clawed his way back. Because Cyber's out there was recurring stand unassailable. But since Cyber wasn't doing that, it was giving David the space to actually maybe eke out a win. Just didn't hit the right cards on the draw, even with the Surveil from Brotherhood Conspirant. So game 3 it is then. And David with the turn 1 Sadistic Indulgence. 3 humans. Now the question is, I was thinking that David would want to open up with a turn 1 Shadowban Console instead to get in some aggression, but if David has like a Blood Artist effect here, this could become or multiple Blood Artists, this could be deadly very quickly. Cyber, meanwhile, unlike David, is going to open up the game the same way as they did last time. Just Wheat from Chaff and going to discard double Wheat from Chaff. That's definitely some hits. Meanwhile, David going to curve out into the Young Necro, which is actually not a good curve out from the Sadistic Indulgence, since that's kind of a non-bow. Also notably, might be wondering why David didn't swing with these humans. It's because they are naturally pacifism. Sadistic Indulgence is not just an insanely overpowered card. It's specifically there for ArisTomeCrats type decks. And David drops the Turned Watcher, which now that's a sack outlet that I can get behind. So I'm going to turn those humans into extra damage and card advantage. But for now, I'm just going to swing for 2 with the Young Necro. And on end, Cyber's going to crack the Desert Fetch, and then presumably crack the Clue. Surprisingly, did not crack the Clue on end. I guess didn't want to lose 2 life to the Desert Shock trigger. So Cyber's actually just going to pass to their turn, play Flooded Morass, and pass. Now, David is going to play Imperial City, hit a second Young Necro. Cyber doesn't have the counter magic for this. I wonder what Cyber's hand looks like. It has 6 cards. And a Blood Artist. This is where it gets dicey. I think this is what you counter if you're Cyber. Oh no, but Cyber's going to let it resolve. So now, David swings in with the Turned Watcher for effectively 5, because going to sack one of the humans to the Turned Watcher. Turned Watcher turns into a 4/2, and then Blood Artist triggers. Oh wow, and Jesus, David is going to sack all 3 of the tokens to the Turned Watcher. Yikes, that was a bad move. Yeah, because now the Turned Watcher just gets hit by Strike from Shadows. I feel like should have kept the tokens around longer anyways, because Turned Watcher doesn't draw you an extra card for each creature sacrificed. Or does it? Oh, it does. That's actually a busted card. I thought it just... I didn't know that it gave you multiple instances for each creature you sacked. Yeah, that would have been crazy if David had gotten to hit. But instead, David is just going to drain Cyber for 4. And yeah, Blood Artist plus these 2 Young Necros is really a problem. And Sadistic Indulgence is a sack outlet that Cyber cannot kill without a Once Abandoned. So can't use like the regular wipes and such to take it out. I don't want to jinx it, but like last game, this looks like it's going to be very difficult for Cyber to get out of. So Cyber is going to tap out for Ancestral Council. Finding a Dreamsight well, or a Stand Unassailable? I would personally find a Stand Unassailable here, but... Or maybe I was going to say the Edict that makes creatures exile instead of die. But instead, Cyber's going to grab a Singularity's Grasp, which I feel like, I don't know, is a wipe really all it's cut out to be here? I guess Singularity's Grasp is a wipe that also kills Sadistic Indulgence, might be the thought. Okay, so David going to play the Zadina Envoys, and I think David just kills a Cyber here. Let me do the math. So, with double Young Necro, destroy Zadina Envoys, drain 1, 4 tokens, that's total of 5, these 2 tokens, total of 7, Young Necro plus the tokens it creates, that's up to 10, the last Young Necro, 11, the token the last Young Necro creates when it itself dies, 12. So now, unless Cyber has an answer to this, Cyber just dies this turn. So David's going to swing in with everything first. Trades the Young Necromancer for the Ancestral Council. And I think that this is a blunder. Actually does 4 damage here. I don't know if that's enough to... if that's enough to balance it out. But... So... Oh yeah, also 2 Blood Artist triggers, so takes 6 because the Ancestral Council also dies. Does David still have lethal this turn? Oh yeah, almost certainly. Because now just sack token, sack token, sack token. And yeah, this... And that's it. David takes it 2-1 over Cyber. So that was a grueling set of matches, but David finally managed to win out. And it was just the clock plus the resilience is so hard to deal with. And I think without an exile wipe, it's just hard, really hard to bring back board parity versus this ArisTomeCrats deck. But yeah, good games to both players. And until next time, this is Caillou signing off.